Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our channel. I'm Les.
And I'm Nina. I have a master's degree in history. I study dead people.
I don't really know that much about history. So, who are we talking about today, Nina?
Henry VIII of England.
Okay, start us off. What can you tell us about his childhood?
Well, he was born in 1491, and the first thing that we need to understand about him is he is the spare, right? His older brother, Arthur, is going to be king. His two sisters are going to be married off for political alliances, right? And he just gets to kind of enjoy his childhood. Right? He gets to learn. He has a really great education, and he really likes, going out with his friends and jousting and hunting and kind of doing all the things that royals do, but without any of the responsibility.
So, was his father king before him?
Yes, his father was Henry VII, and his father wasn't actually born to be king either. His grandfather wasn't king, for example.
Hmm.
But during this war that we call the War of the Roses, Henry VII wins, right? And so all of his life, Henry VII is always worried that someone's going to overthrow him, just like he overthrew the last king.
So, tell me about the title. Is Henry his actual name? So, why is it the eighth and his son is the seventh, or his father is the seventh? Does it just progressively keep going up to a certain point?
Every time a British king or queen, a monarch, takes the throne, they get to decide on their regnal name. The
Under
name
under
regnal,
Regnal. Okay.
the name that they'll rule under. Sometimes it's their actual name, sometimes it isn't. So for Henry, his father was Henry VII. He wanted people to closely connect him with his father, who was a great army man, right? Henry
Okay.
VIII really wanted to be a great general. And so he took Henry VIII, right, so that in people's minds, they were very clear that he was Henry VII, the conqueror's son.
Okay, so it's more like a title type
Hmm.
type situation. So did he end up getting married?
He got married 6 times.
Six.
Hmm.
Obviously, it was him.
Well, surprisingly, his first wife was actually his older brother's widow, right? So when Prince Arthur got married, he married Catherine of Aragon, right,
Okay.
from Spain. And later, Catherine would claim that the relationship had never been consummated, that Arthur had been too sickly, right, and to consummate the relationship. So she claimed that meant they weren't really married. Well, when she came back, Henry kind of liked her. She was very beautiful. And so he actually married her as soon as he got on the throne. And they were married for more than 20 years. They had a lot of pregnancies. So she would get pregnant. She would either have a miscarriage or her children would be stillborn. So she only had two children out of, I think, over 10 pregnancies that actually resulted in a live birth. Queen Mary the First, and um, a prince. Let me see. I want to make sure. Prince Henry, who was born, which of course his father was thrilled, but he died when he was 2 months old.
Oh, wow, from illness or would you know?
Presumably, we don't really know. Um, and so after that, right, Henry is desperate. Remember, his father wasn't born to be king. And England had had a really long tradition of not wanting women to rule. So he was desperate for a boy. And he actually marries 6 times trying to get a male heir.
Really?
Hmm. And this is what's interesting. Scholars claim that 70% of his wife's pregnancies ended in either miscarriage or stillbirth. So we don't know if maybe Henry had some kind of fertility issue, if he had had some kind of illness or disease that prevented live births. But in 6 marriages, at least one mistress, right? But presumably more. He only ever has 4 children that we absolutely know are his. 2 are girls, Queen Mary the First, Queen Elizabeth the First. His son, Henry Fitzroy, who is illegitimate, meaning he wasn't married to his mother.
Uh-huh.
And then King Edward, who is his son and actually does become king after him, but also dies of an illness very young, very similar to Henry's brother.
Oh, wow. So, did he divorce each one of these? Were they amicable separation? She got half the castle. How does it work out?
He forcibly divorces his first wife, but he has to actually break from the Roman Catholic Church to do it. His second, and then he marries his mistress, Anne Boleyn. And Anne has 4 pregnancies.
Mhm.
Again, she has one miscarriage, one live birth, Queen Elizabeth I, and then 2 stillbirths, both of whom are boys. So he has all of his advisors claim that she's been unfaithful to him and that she has been saying things like when Henry dies, which is treason. So he
Oh,
beheads
really?
her.
You couldn't say that back then, huh?
No. So he beheads her. 9 days later, he marries his third wife, Jane Seymour.
9 days.
9 days.
Oh.
So, probably a mistress, right?
Uh-huh.
Just like Anne had been. She dies during childbirth to his son, Edward.
Wow. Okay.
His fourth wife is Anne of Cleves. He had never met her before. So it was,
A prearranged marriage or something?
he was looking for an alliance
Ah, okay.
with Protestant countries.
That was kind of a big deal back then that you would marry your enemy's child, kind of thing, or
Marry your enemy's child, or in this case, right, you have such a large enemy, you're going to marry someone from a country who's your enemy's enemy. Remember, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
uh-huh.
And he asks for a portrait, so a small painting of her. And he is sorely disappointed when they meet.
Was
He
it bad ink?
he claims the portrait was more flattering than was allowable, right?
Oh, they used their painting filter.
Yes, right. When he meets her, like in England, there'd been this long
Uh-huh.
tradition when you get married of a masked man coming and trying to kiss you.
Hmm.
And the idea is he's your true love. You'll know it's him even through the mask.
Ah, I see.
Well, when he does this, Anne of Cleves doesn't know this and she kind of pushes him away. And he's really, really offended. And for 4 days after they get married, he tries to consummate the relationship,
Uh-huh.
but is unable to do so. So he claims it's because she's so ugly that she repulses him. There are rumors that she smells, right? And so he has that marriage annulled,
Annulled.
meaning it never happened. And from then on, he calls her our sister.
Uh-huh.
Now, he gives her a castle, he gives her money for the rest of his life to kind of support her. Because, I mean, can she really go home after the
Being
King of
rejected by
England was
yeah. So
like,
it didn't start a war or anything, or
right?
you know.
Um, after that, he is quite old. He's in his 40s already, and
Oh.
he marries a very young girl, probably 17, 18, Catherine Howard.
Uh-huh.
And they're not married very long. She definitely was cheating on him. Um,
Really?
so he kills her.
Oh. Off
Uh,
with the head, or
yeah. And finally, Catherine Parr had been a widow, and he marries her. He is in his very late 40s, and they are married for the last 6 years of his life. His last 3 wives do not have children by him.
oh wow. So he doesn't have a legacy to leave behind? Is that
At that point, he has one legitimate son and 2 illegitimate. At various points, he had declared both Mary and Anne as illegitimate. And so everything's fine. Edward is old enough to rule, right? He takes the crown and then he dies.
oh wow.
So the question is, who gets to be monarch?
Okay. I also know that he had some kind of a lifelong injury that he'd hurt himself. Um, I guess earlier in his life,
Mhm.
doing something obviously stupid, which is what we do when we're young. So, and that had plagued him throughout his entire life.
Jousting. He really, really loved jousting. And I mean, it sounds like he was pretty good at it.
Mm-hmm.
And he had had several injuries. One earlier in his life where we know he had an ulcer on his thigh, but presumably it had healed. But then in 1536, so he's in his early 40s at this point. He is jousting and he takes a fall off his horse. Well, his horse is in full armor and actually falls on him.
Oh, wow. That wasn't that aluminum alloy stuff that they used back
No,
then?
no.
And he didn't die from tetanus?
No, it completely crushed his leg.
Oh, wow.
He absolutely had a head injury. In fact, he becomes really cruel after this point.
Uh-huh.
And so some scholars have argued that maybe he had such a severe head injury that it changed his personality.
Oh, wow.
We know he was plagued by headaches and migraines the rest of his life. He has lots of leg ulcers. Remember, his leg was crushed, probably didn't heal correctly. So he had these ulcers that his doctors would actually cut open to get the pus out.
Oh, my gosh. And this plagued him throughout his entire life?
The rest of his life.
So how young was he when he actually got this injury? Do we have an idea?
He was in his, probably, it looks like his late 30s.
Oh,
He lived another 11 years.
okay.
With this, we know he had sepsis at least once. Throughout the rest of his life, he would have areas in which his leg would get worse, right? More pus and infection. We know it smelled really, really bad. In fact,
Sounds like gangrene almost, kind of.
yeah, definitely sepsis. And some of the courtiers actually claimed you could smell him 3 rooms away.
Oh, wow.
Now imagine you're Catherine Howard and you're getting married to this man who is old enough to presumably be your father or perhaps even your grandfather. And at this point, he's really fat, he's very obese, he smells bad. And, she's quite young. So, the infidelity, while not appropriate, right, certainly not acceptable at the time for a woman to do that, it might actually be, understandable.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about how he ruled. How did he treat his subjects?
It depended on the period we're talking about. Right. His father was known as very stern, taxed his subjects, didn't really throw lavish entertainments. Right. So when 17-year-old Henry VIII becomes, king with this lovely, beautiful wife at his side, the people were pretty happy. Right. They were thrilled. He was 6 feet tall. He was handsome. He had curly red hair. Right. He was an athlete. He loved sports. Right. According to the courtiers, he was quite dashing in his armor. And so he was really, really popular. Right. He would throw lavish entertainments, which, started with his wedding.
Was he also feared?
Towards the end of his life, yes. By about 1527, his bankruptcy or his money problems start. So, of course, now he wants to tax his nobles heavier because he needs money.
What is he using the funding for?
Well, remember I told you his father had been this great general. He wants to win, right? He wants to go to war and he wants to win. And who's his rival? Francis of France, right? And so they, have several battles. They go to war, right? And Henry doesn't do well. So he's spending all of this money, right, on ships and armies and soldier pay and long logistic lines to France, but he's not getting anything. Like, there's no war rewards, there's no booty. In fact, we know that he meets Frances once and they are trying to outdo each other with more lavish gifts, more lavish entertainments,
Mm-hmm.
right? To kind of trying to the one up. So they're both fairly young kings. And so between his lavish lifestyle, war is expensive,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's not getting the taxes that his father had gotten because what's the first thing he does? He cuts taxes. And so he really is having money problems by the late 1520s, early 1530s.
Wow. What can you tell us about the religion of the time? Does he force religion? Is he pretty much open to whatever, or is he?
Henry is so interesting because in the early part of his life, he is a devout Roman Catholic, right? Going so far as when the Protestant Reformation really is in full swing, 1519, 15, early 1520s, he's writing treatises in support of Catholicism. So much so that the Pope actually calls him fide defensor, the loyal defense, right? But by the late 1520s, he's been married almost 20 years. He has no sons, right? He had gone out on his marriage, right? He had been unfaithful. He'd had at least two mistresses that we know of.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth Blunt, who was the mother of the illegitimate son that he actually um, recognized, Henry Fitzroy. He also had a relationship with Mary Boleyn, his future wife's sister, and probably his father's two of her children, right? By this time, he's met Anne. Anne is 20 years old. She is beautiful. She's well educated. She's kind of a flirt. So she flirts with everyone. And he decides, you know what? I have to divorce Catherine, right? And I have to remarry. So he asks the Roman Catholic Church, he asks the Pope, will you grant me a divorce so that I can remarry? Will you grant me an annulment so I can remarry? This puts the Pope in a really awkward situation. Remember, right?
Yeah.
Catherine had been his brother's widow.
Uh-huh.
He had had to ask special permission from the Pope, right, in order to marry her.
Uh-huh.
And the Pope said, yes, the relationship wasn't consummated. That's fine. Well, now, right, the new Pope has to decide, was the Catholic Church wrong to let them get married?
Uh-huh.
Whoops. Well, the other thing is, remember, the Pope's in Italy,
Uh-huh.
Henry's in England.
Uh-huh.
Well, between them, you have Charles V, the Holy Roman Empire emperor, right? He happens to be Catherine's nephew. So the Catholic Church, like the Pope tries to delay, and finally just says, no, we can't grant you a divorce. Well, he's already in love with Anne Boleyn. By 1532, she's pregnant. He wants the child in case it's a son, right?
Uh-huh.
He wants the child to be legitimate. So they marry in secret. So now, technically, according to the Roman Catholic Church, he has two wives.
Uh-huh.
He has the parliament, right, the legislative branch, pass the Act of Supremacy and the Act of Succession in 1534. It essentially recognizes Henry as the head of a new church, the Church of England. This is the Anglican Church today. First thing he
So is this
does,
is he can make his own rules and regulations based on
yes,
the lifestyle that he wants to pursue.
yes.
Okay.
And so what's the first thing he does? He has his new Archbishop of Canterbury say that his first marriage is annulled. Why? It was a sin for him to marry his brother's wife. Clearly, she lied,
Uh-huh.
and God was punishing them, and that's why they don't have a son. He marries Anne Boleyn now, right? We have a new Church of England. It's pretty similar to the Catholic Church,
Uh-huh.
except there's no Pope. right? But what about his money problems?
Uh-huh.
Well, the monasteries, the Roman Catholic monasteries, the monks and the heads of whom refused to acknowledge this new Church of England, he disbands them, right? He takes all of the wealth for himself, right? And all the land, which was pretty good land, he gave to his most loyal um, supporters.
Uh-huh.
So now he's actually, in one fell swoop, he's able to get out of bankruptcy and refund his, kind of get all of this wealth that had been the church's.
Wow. Okay.
He is able to help or reward his loyal supporters, and he gets to marry Anne Boleyn.
Wow. So it's a win-win situation for him. Yeah.
Well, but the problem is he kills a lot of people because of it.
Uh-huh.
In fact, he kills more people than any other British monarch before or since. He is killing Catholics.
So was he also a conqueror as well? Did he? No?
No. He had one significant victory that was against Scotland, but he wasn't in charge of it. He was in France at the time, so his wife, Catherine, whom he divorced, actually took charge. She actually led the army in Scotland, defeated, right, all of the people who were in
Wow.
rebellion. That was his one victory, and he wasn't even there.
So tell us a little bit about his military then. So what did he have?
He wasn't a good conqueror. He wasn't a good military man, although he always wanted to be.
Uh-huh.
But he really believed in the Navy. In fact, he believed in the Navy so much that he expanded it by 10 times larger than it had been before. He actually created two new dockyards for his warships, right? So while the army was okay, you're one of the nobles in England. I'm going to war. I tell you, you owe me so many men for my army,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So it wasn't really a professional standing army, but his navy was.
I see. Okay. And how would you say, what kind of influence has he had on the world that we see today? What has been a result of him being in power?
Well, clearly, Protestantism became much more acceptable in England, right? It became the dominant religious strain, right? Um, and the United States, right, had been founded by Protestants, right? Protestants who maybe um, were not in the Church of England, but were Protestant. So they came here. So a lot of the early immigrants to the British New World, right, British America, were Protestants. The fact that today England is Protestant,
Mhm.
direct result of Henry VIII. The fact that England became the dominant world power because of the strength of her navy is all because of Henry VIII. And he was a big supporter of medicine, right? He actually establishes the Royal College of Physicians in 1519, which actually made sure that all physicians were regulated and licensed.
Oh, really?
He spent a lot of money on public health, making sure that you had clean drinking water. He actually had protocols in place for plague, right? He was known to actually mix up his own salves and ointments and give them to his courtiers. And it appears that they were quite successful, right? So he knew a lot about medicine. He was kind of a Renaissance king. In his court had, really popular musicians and artists, philosophers, sportsmen, right? He really loved sports. And so he had this really thriving artistic court,
Uh-huh.
um, which the people loved initially because they had a handsome young king. He was doing these really great impressive things. New ideas were being revealed. He was quite literate. He was a very good author. And so people would read what he wrote. And yet, on the other hand, his desperate need for an heir, um, which is one of the great ironies of history. One of the greatest monarchs that England ever had was one of his children, Queen Elizabeth I.
Really?
So he marries 5 times
Huh.
looking for a boy male, and it turns out the successor he needed all along was his daughter. Oh, and the daughter of Anne Boleyn, whom he beheaded for infidelity.
Wow. That was a very interesting conversation.
Mhm,
Thank you so much, Nina, for explaining Henry VIII to us.
mhm.
Thank you so much for joining us on our channel. Hopefully, you'll hit that subscribe and the thumbs up button.
If you have any comments for us, if you have a suggestion for future, um, people to talk about, we'd love to hear it. Just go ahead and make a comment down below.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.